There's a reason you can't do small talk, why shallow connections feel like starvation, why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Jung called it dangerous perception, and if you have it, you already know the cost of seeing what others don't. You feel it, don't you? That gnawing sensation that you're living in a world that wasn't built for you, like everyone else received a manual for life and yours got lost in the mail. You watch conversations unfold like scripted performances. You see the desperation behind every laugh, the fear masked as confidence, the profound loneliness disguised as social success. And the worst part? You've started believing there's something fundamentally wrong with you. But here's what nobody tells you about this exhaustion you carry, this inability to engage with surface level everything. It's not a bug in your system, it's a feature, a rare one. You've probably been labelled as difficult since childhood. The kid who asked too many questions, who couldn't just accept because I said so as an answer, who felt the weight of family dysfunction even when everyone pretended things were fine. School was probably hell, not because you couldn't learn, but because you learned too much. You picked up on the teacher's personal problems, felt the classroom's collective anxiety before tests, absorbed the social hierarchies that others navigated unconsciously. And somewhere along the way, you got the message. Tone it down. Stop being so sensitive. Why can't you just be normal like everyone else? Carl Jung spent decades studying human consciousness, and he identified something that most psychologists miss entirely. There are people walking among us who process reality at a depth that would break the average person, who sees patterns others can't see, feel what others won't feel, and know truths that most spend their entire lives avoiding. Jung called these individuals differentiated, not better than others, but operating from a fundamentally different baseline. Where most people's psychological defense mechanisms filter out uncomfortable truths, yours never developed properly. Or maybe they developed too well, and then cracked under the weight of too much reality. In his research on personality types, Jung found that certain individuals carry what he termed conscious suffering. They feel not just their own pain, but the collective pain of humanity. They can't tune out injustice. They can't unsee suffering. Can't pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. If you're one of them, you've probably been told you're too intense or too sensitive your whole life. Like there's a volume knob on your soul that everyone else knows how to turn down, but you're stuck on maximum volume. The truth is, you're not broken. You're just operating on a different frequency. And once you understand what Jung discovered about this rare type of consciousness, everything, your exhaustion, your isolation, your complete inability to tolerate superficiality will finally make sense. But I need to warn you about something. What you're about to learn might shake you. Because once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. Once you understand what makes you different, you can't go back to pretending you're ordinary. Are you ready for that kind of truth? Let's start with the first sign, because this is where Jung's work gets almost supernatural. Sign number 1, you have dangerous perception. You don't just see people, you see through them. Their words say one thing, but their micro-expressions scream another. Their stories paint success, but their energy radiates desperation. You pick up what they're not saying louder than what they are. This isn't some mystical ability you've developed. This is your nervous system processing reality at a resolution most people can't handle. Jung termed this inferior function development, where your least developed psychological function actually becomes hypersensitive to compensate. Think about your last conversation. While they talked about their promotion, you saw the soul-crushing compromise they made to get it. While they bragged about their relationship, you felt the loneliness they're drowning in. You didn't ask for this ability. You can't turn it off, and it's slowly destroying you. But here's what Jung understood. When you see this much this clearly, you become a walking mirror. And mirrors, they terrify people who've spent their lives avoiding their own reflection. This creates what Jung called psychological contagion. Your mere presence activates everyone else's shadow material. That awkward silence that follows when you make an observation that cuts too deep, that's not you being inappropriate. That's collective unconscious material rising to the surface. You know that tension that fills the room when you're present? That's not your imagination. That's their unconscious recognizing that you see their shadow, the parts they've buried so deep they've convinced themselves don't exist. Your very presence asks a question they're not ready to answer. Why are you still pretending? And rather than face that question, they make you the problem. You're too intense. You overthink everything. Can't you just be normal? But you can't be normal. Because normal means accepting the surface as reality. Normal means participating in collective delusion. Normal means betraying the very gift that makes you who you are. Sign number 2, you're allergic to superficiality. Small talk feels like psychological torture. Casual friendships leave you lonelier than solitude. You need conversations that bypass the weather and dive straight into the soul. You crave connections where masks aren't just optional, they're impossible. Jung saw this clearly. He said rare personality types live in constant existential tension. You can't fully participate in collective unconsciousness, but you can't escape it either. You're trapped between worlds, too awake to sleep, too human to transcend. This creates what Jung called neurotic suffering, not pathological, but the natural result of consciousness outgrowing its container. You're like a butterfly trying to live in a caterpillar's world. The problem isn't you, it's that you've outgrown the space you're trying to fit into. Here's what's really happening. Most people live in the collective unconscious, shared patterns, assumptions, and behaviours that keep society functioning. But they're unconscious of these patterns. You see the matrix. You see how arbitrary so many social rules are, how much suffering is caused by everyone agreeing to pretend certain things are normal. But here's the shadow side nobody discusses. This depth you carry is also what isolates you, because while you're starving for real connection, most people are perfectly content with emotional fast food. They want comfort, not truth. They want validation, not growth. They want to stay safely unconscious. And when you won't give them that, they experience you as a threat. Think about how many relationships you've lost. Not because you did something wrong, but because you couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't laugh at empty jokes. Couldn't engage in gossip. Couldn't discuss the weather when your soul was screaming to discuss why we're even here. This isn't pretentiousness. This is survival. Because for someone with your type of consciousness, superficial interaction doesn't just bore you, it literally drains your life force. You've probably noticed that you need way more recovery time than most people after social interactions. That's because you're processing multiple layers of reality simultaneously. Their words, their energy, their unconscious projections, the group dynamics, the unspoken tensions. It's like having super hearing in a world full of noise. You've probably noticed something else too. Something that happens when you're around others that you can't quite explain. An exhaustion that goes beyond social fatigue. A feeling like you're carrying weights that aren't yours. That's because you are. Sign number 3, you absorb everything. Not just thoughts or observations, everything. Other people's unexpressed rage, their repressed grief, their denied desires. You're not just an observer, you're an emotional alchemist, unconsciously transmuting the psychological debris of everyone around you. Jung called this participation mystique, where individual boundaries dissolve and you merge with the collective unconscious. For most people, this happens rarely. For you, it's constant. Here's where it gets really wild. Jung discovered that certain individuals are naturally psychic containers for their family systems, their workplaces, even their communities. You become the one who holds the emotional truths that everyone else is avoiding. The family scapegoat who carries the dysfunction. The office negative person who's actually just feeling everyone's repressed stress. That depression that hits from nowhere, often not yours. That anxiety gripping your chest, you might have absorbed it from the colleague who sat next to you. That inexplicable rage could be the unexpressed fury of everyone you encountered today. This is why crowds feel overwhelming. You can walk into a room and immediately know if there's been an argument, why you need to shower after being around certain people. You're literally washing off their psychic residue. This is why you need so much alone time. Not because you're antisocial, but because you need to sort through what's yours and what isn't. You need silence to hear your own thoughts again. Solitude to remember who you are beneath the psychic noise. But here's the brutal truth. This absorption can become addictive, because when you're drowning in other people's emotions, you don't have to face your own emptiness. You're solving everyone else's problems. When you're solving everyone else's problems, you avoid confronting yours. When you're the counselor, the healer, the one everyone comes to, you get to bypass your own inner work. Jung called this helper syndrome, where your gift for seeing and healing others becomes a way to avoid your own pain. You become so good at being needed that you forget how to have needs of your own, until one day you wake up and realize You know everyone else's soul intimately, but your own is a stranger. Sign number 4. You're fighting an invisible war. Jung understood that people like you live with a fundamental split between who you are and who the world needs you to be. Your true self is too intense for everyday consumption, so you fragment. Professional you, social you, family you, all carefully calibrated performances, all exhausting, none of them real. Jung called this persona development gone wrong. The persona is supposed to be a useful mask you put on for specific situations, but for people like you, the persona becomes a prison. You develop multiple versions of yourself, each one slightly dimmed down, slightly more palatable, slightly less true. Every mask you wear is a small betrayal. Every time you dial down your intensity, you abandon your nature. Every moment you pretend to be normal, you feed the lie that who you really are is unacceptable. This split creates symptoms doctors can't explain. Chronic fatigue that no amount of sleep fixes, your soul exhausted from constant performance, anxiety that appears from nowhere, your authentic self screaming to be released, depression that descends like fog, the grief of living as a stranger to yourself. You might find yourself getting sick a lot, having mysterious ailments that doctors can't quite pin down. That's because your body is rejecting the lie. Jung understood that psychological splits manifest as physical symptoms. Your body becomes the battlefield between your true self and your performed self. You're not mentally ill, you're spiritually suffocating. And here's the cruel irony. The more successful you become at performing normalcy, the more lost you feel. You start getting praised for the very things that are killing you. You're so easygoing, they say, when inside you're screaming. You're such a team player, when collaboration feels like death by 1,000 compromises. The exhaustion of maintaining these fragments, these false selves, it's unsustainable. Your body knows it, your soul knows it, and deep down, you know it too. But society has convinced you that this is just being an adult, that growth means learning to fit in, that maturity means killing off the parts of yourself that don't serve the collective comfort. But something else is happening while you're fragmenting yourself to fit in. Your true frequency is sending out a signal, and there are others who can hear it. Sign number 5. You recognize your own kind instantly. It's not logical. You meet someone, anywhere, anytime, and within seconds, you know, there's a frequency match, a soul recognition, a feeling of, oh, there you are, I've been looking for you. Jung called this synchronicity, but it goes deeper. It's like having a secret antenna that only picks up certain signals. When you encounter someone operating at your wavelength, your whole system lights up. Time warps, masks drop without effort. You find yourself sharing things you've never told anyone, and they're nodding like they've been waiting their whole lives to hear exactly that. These connections are rare. Maybe you've had 1 or 2 in your lifetime. Maybe you're still searching. But when they happen, they validate everything you've always felt but could never prove. You're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not too much, you're just rare. And rare recognizes rare. This is what Jung meant by constellation, certain archetypes activating in the presence of compatible consciousness. It's why you can feel more understood by a stranger in 5 minutes than by family members you've known your whole life. But here's the shadow. Once you've tasted true recognition, everything feels like starvation. Once you've been genuinely seen, invisibility becomes agony. Your frequency can't settle for static anymore. This is why you might sabotage relationships that ask you to dim your light. Why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Why you can't go backwards once you've experienced the authentic connection. Your soul has standards now. You might find yourself in a strange paradox, becoming more selective about relationships while simultaneously becoming more lonely. Jung called this the sacrifice of belonging. To find your tribe, you have to be willing to leave the crowd, and those standards are connected to something even bigger. Sign number 6. You carry a purpose too big for one lifetime. Not a career, not goals, a purpose. Something that burns in your bones. Wakes you up at 3 a.m. with downloads too vast for your mind to process. Something that feels less like a choice and more like cosmic alignment. Jung understood this burden. He said individuated people, those who've integrated their shadow and found their true self, carry a specific responsibility. They see what needs healing in the collective. They feel what needs expression. They know what needs creation. This is what Jung called your transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious. between individual and collective, between what is and what could be. You're not just living your own life, you're carrying possibilities for humanity's evolution. But here's the paradox. The very sensitivity that allows you to feel this purpose also makes it almost impossible to fulfill. Because to do what you came here to do, you'd have to be fully yourself. And being fully yourself in this world feels like social suicide. Your purpose isn't comfortable. It's not about success by normal standards. It's about being a bridge between worlds, about saying what others can't say, healing what others don't even know is wounded. You might find that traditional career paths feel suffocating, that conventional measures of success leave you empty. That's because you're not here to climb ladders. You're here to build bridges, not to achieve within existing systems, but to imagine new ones. This is why nothing ever feels like enough, why even your successes leave you empty. You're not here to succeed, you're here to transform, to wake something up, to midwife a new way of being. This is called the individuation imperative, a developmental pressure that pushes certain individuals toward wholeness, regardless of social approval. You can't not follow this call. It will find ways to surface through crisis, dreams, symptoms, synchronicities, whatever it takes to get your attention. But you can't do that while you're hiding. Here's where Jung's insight becomes almost mystical. Sign number 7. Your greatest wound is your greatest gift. Jung discovered that rare personality types often carry what he called a sacred wound, a deep psychic injury that becomes the source of their power. Maybe you were the child who felt everything too deeply, the one who saw through family facades, the one who couldn't pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. Maybe you were the scapegoat, the identified patient, the one who carried the family's unconscious material. That hypersensitivity that made you a target, it's the same sensitivity that allows you to perceive what others miss. That isolation you experienced, it forced you to develop an inner world rich enough to sustain you. That inability to fit in, it preserved your authenticity in a world that rewards conformity. Your wound taught you to see in the dark, and now you can guide others through their own darkness. This is what Jung called the wounded healer archetype. Shamans, therapists, artists, and spiritual teachers who transform their own suffering into medicine for others. Your wound isn't something to be ashamed of. It's your initiation into deeper consciousness. But here's what Jung understood that most therapy misses. The goal isn't to heal your wound away. It's to develop a conscious relationship with it, to honor it as your teacher while not being enslaved by it. This is the ultimate alchemical truth Jung uncovered. What breaks us open is what allows light to enter. What isolates us is what makes us unique. What wounds us is what awakens us. But here's what most people don't understand. Integration of this wound isn't about healing it away. It's about honoring it as your teacher, your initiator, your sacred marking that says, I survived what should have destroyed me, and now I'm dangerous to every lie. This wound gift makes you a natural healer, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Not because you've transcended pain, but because you've alchemized it into wisdom. Jung said something profound about this. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For people like you, this acceptance isn't just personal work. It's a revolutionary act, because when you stop apologizing for your depth, you give others permission to embrace theirs. So let me ask you something. Are you ready to stop apologizing for who you are? Because Jung said it best, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For rare personality types, this isn't just privilege, it's responsibility. The world doesn't need another well-adjusted person. It needs you, in all your complicated, intense, too much glory. Here's what's going to happen when you finally own your frequency. People will resist the real you. Some will leave. The world will test your commitment to authenticity in 1,000 ways. But something else will happen too. The right people will find you. Work that only you can do will reveal itself. Your real life, the one waiting beneath all the masks, will finally begin. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you were always meant to be, rather than who others needed you to be. It's not easy. It requires what he termed moral courage, the willingness to stand alone if necessary, to be misunderstood, to disappoint people who love your false self. But here's what Jung promised. When you finally integrate all parts of yourself, the light and the shadow, the wound and the gift, the human and the transcendent, you become what he called a unique phenomenon. Not better than others, but irreplaceably yourself. Your sensitivity isn't weakness. It's a superpower in a world that's forgotten how to feel. Your intensity isn't too much. It's exactly what's needed in a culture addicted to surface level everything. Your inability to fit in isn't a flaw. It's a contribution to a world that desperately needs people willing to be real. Every breakthrough in human consciousness came from someone who couldn't see things a normal way. Every revolution began in the mind of someone too sensitive to accept the status quo. That's you. That's your role. Jung understood something profound. In a world addicted to facades, your authenticity isn't just personal liberation, it's medicine for a dying collective soul. The courage to be disliked, as Jung put it, is the price of psychological freedom. And the weird thing is, once you pay that price, once you're willing to be misunderstood, you actually become more magnetic to the right people. Authenticity is rare enough that it draws people like moths to flame. So here's your choice. You can keep fragmenting yourself, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You can keep apologizing for your depth, your intensity, your refusal to engage with meaningless small talk. Or you can finally accept the truth. You weren't born to fit in. You were born to stand out, to see what others don't, to feel what others don't, to speak the truths that others are too afraid to whisper. The question isn't whether you're rare. You already know you are. The question is, what are you going to do with that rarity? Because the world is waiting, not for another person who knows how to blend in, but for someone brave enough to be exactly who they are. Your frequency is a gift to the world. Your authenticity is your revolution. Your refusal to be ordinary is your service to everyone still pretending. Welcome to your real life. Welcome to your frequency. Welcome home.